My envious sister branded me a gold digger and attempted to sabotage my boyfriend's professional life. My parents, as usual, sided with her. Greetings to all. I'm at a loss for where to begin. I suppose I've always been the secondary sister. My name is Lindsay, and I'm 29. I matured in the shadow of my elder sister, Melanie, who is currently 34. It seems as though my entire existence has been an attempt to rival her, but I never succeeded, at least not in the eyes of my parents. Melanie has consistently been the favored child. I remember as a youngster observing how effortlessly everything seemed to align for her. She was the lead in every theatrical production, the captain of her soccer team, and the exemplary student whom my parents constantly lauded. Meanwhile, I was merely Lindsay, the quiet one, the girl who found solace in sketching but did not excel in areas they deemed important. It wasn't for lack of trying. I immersed myself in art, believing it was my one true talent, but even that proved insufficient. I vividly recall a particular parent-teacher conference when my middle school art teacher informed my mother of my genuine talent and the possibility of a college scholarship with dedicated effort. I was incredibly proud and thrilled, but upon returning home, my mother remarked, "That's lovely, dear, but art isn't a practical career path. Melanie is already preparing for the SATs. Perhaps focus on something more pragmatic." This devastated me. I was 12. I had no desire for practicality. I yearned for their pride, even if it differed from their admiration for Melanie. But the preferential treatment didn't stop there. My parents provided Melanie with every conceivable advantage: piano lessons, private tutoring, and expensive summer camps, which she didn't seem to appreciate. When it came to me, however, funds were purportedly limited. I requested painting lessons, even inexpensive ones at the community center, but the response was always, "No, we simply can't afford it right now, Lindsay." Yet, they managed to finance a new car for Melanie when she turned 16. Regarding that car, here's an incident that still infuriates me. On my 16th birthday, I persuaded myself that this was finally my moment. If Melanie received a car, perhaps they'd surprise me with one as well. Instead, I received a sweater. A sweater. I'm not ungrateful. I realize not every child receives a car, but the real kicker? Melanie returned home from college with a flat tire, and guess who had to wait and observe my father spend hours repairing it while my birthday cake sat uneaten on the counter. Happy birthday to me. And it's not merely the material disparities that hurt, it's the emotional disregard. My mother perpetually praised Melanie, saying things like, "You're so beautiful, you're so intelligent, and you're destined for greatness." I can't recall the last time she said anything similar to me. I was overjoyed to secure my first position at a small graphic design firm, but my mother's reaction was, "That's nice, but when are you returning to school?" You know Melanie earned her master's degree. I attempted to discuss it with my father once. He's more reserved than my mother, and more compliant. I inquired why it seemed they favored Melanie over me. He sighed, appeared uncomfortable, and replied, "We don't love her more, Lindsay. She simply requires us more." What does that even signify? Is she in greater need of them? Everything was handed to her. If anyone needed support, it was me. As I matured, the chasm between us expanded. Melanie progressed to greater and better achievements: an Ivy League education, a lucrative career in finance, and a dazzling engagement ring from her equally attractive fiancé. And me? I felt stagnant. My art career didn't flourish as I'd envisioned, and every encounter with my parents involved the question, "So, what's next?" As if my accomplishments were inadequate. One of the most mortifying experiences occurred last Thanksgiving. Melanie and her fiancé, Jason, came for dinner, And my parents went all out. Prime rib, exquisite wine, the full spread. I contributed a pumpkin pie that I had baked myself, a source of considerable pride given my limited culinary skills. When I presented it, my mother offered a strained smile and said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's kind." But Melanie brought a cheesecake from that bakery downtown. Everyone adores their desserts. Guess which one was consumed first? Melanie not only receives all the praise, but she also seems to feign ignorance of it. She pretends not to acknowledge the bias, but I suspect she relishes being the focal point. Years ago, I attempted to address it with her. I expressed the unfairness of our parents' disparate treatment. She gazed at me with wide, innocent eyes and declared, "Lindsay, you're being absurd. Mom and Dad love us equally." Then, she promptly posted a picture on Instagram with the caption, "My parents are the best," over a photo of the new watch they'd bought her just because. I feel as though I've been subjected to gaslighting my entire life. Every attempt to articulate my emotions is met with either denial or condescending sympathy. "You're overreacting, Lindsay," or, "Oh, you poor thing," as if I were a delicate flower incapable of managing her feelings. It's draining. I've been growing increasingly estranged from my family. I ceased attending family functions and only called my mother to hear about Melanie's latest triumphs. I've been refocusing on my painting, endeavoring to reignite the passion I possessed as a child before. Their constant comparisons depleted me, but it's difficult. Regardless of how hard I try to distance myself, that inner voice persistently shouts, "You'll never measure up." I suppose my question is, am I irrational for feeling this way? Is it unreasonable to desire my parents to acknowledge me for who I am rather than who I am not? Or am I fated to remain in Melanie's shadow for the rest of my life? After years of feeling trapped, I eventually found what I considered a positive situation. I'd been working as a freelance graphic designer, steadily building a portfolio that filled me with pride. It wasn't a prestigious profession, but I cherished it. For once, I felt autonomous, liberated from the endless comparisons to Melanie. That's when I encountered Zach. It was an unexpected encounter at a small business convention I attended for networking purposes. I was standing somewhat awkwardly near a display, perusing brochures, when he approached. He was tall, with dark hair subtly graying at the temples, and he possessed a natural confidence that I immediately observed. "You appear as though you'd prefer to be elsewhere," he remarked with a smirk. I chuckled, slightly embarrassed. "Is it that transparent?" He introduced himself as Zach, the founder of a small but successful tech startup that developed software for small businesses. As we conversed, I learned he was 36, self-employed, and had built his company from scratch. Zach, unlike many individuals I'd met at such events, was neither ostentatious nor condescending. When I described my work, he listened attentively, posing questions about my design methodology and the types of clients I served. It was a welcome change. We maintained contact for several weeks. Zach was more than just pleasant and charming. He was intelligent, driven, and genuinely interested in my perspectives. He commissioned me to create some branding materials for his company, and collaborating with him was a delight. He treated me as an equal, a novel experience after years of being overshadowed by Melanie. When Zach and I began dating, it felt incredibly refreshing. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not as Melanie's sibling or the less accomplished daughter, but as Lindsay. He wasn't preoccupied with my family dynamics or the emotional baggage I carried. He appreciated me for who I was. Naturally, Melanie had to interfere. Initially, my parents seemed cautiously optimistic about Zach. They admired his success, though my mother couldn't resist making snide comments like, "Well, he's a bit older, isn't he? Or I hope he's sincere about his intentions with you." Melanie, however, detested him from the outset. I should have anticipated it. Melanie thrives on being the center of attention, the object of everyone's envy. Zach's achievements posed a threat to her. She couldn't comprehend that I'd found someone who was not only kind and supportive, but also remarkably successful in his own right. So, in typical Melanie fashion, she sought to create discord. It began subtly. During a family dinner, Melanie remarked on how convenient it was that I met Zach while working on a project for him. "So, did you land the guy and the client?" she quipped, loud enough for everyone to hear. I tried to dismiss it, but the implication was clear. She was suggesting I was only dating Zach for his financial status. Matters rapidly escalated after that. Melanie began disseminating rumors within our family, alleging that Zach was some sort of sugar daddy. She even informed my parents that I was exploiting him to escape my lackluster career. "I just think Lindsay's rushing into things," she'd say, feigning concern. "It's not like she's ever dated someone like Zach before. You have to admit, it's a significant step up." The worst part? My parents believed her. My mother confronted me one evening after dinner. "Lindsay," she began, her tone filled with worry. "Are you certain Zach is the right person for you? He's so well established. I just don't want you to be hurt if this doesn't work out." "What are you talking about?" I retorted. "Zach and I are happy. Why can't you just be happy for me?" Mom hesitated. "It's just..." Melanie mentioned some things. "Of course she did," I interjected, "because Melanie can't tolerate it when the attention isn't focused on her." I stormed out that night, but the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and no matter how much I defended myself, it seemed my family had already formed their opinions. The rumors didn't remain confined to my family. Melanie began spreading them among mutual acquaintances, people I hadn't communicated with in years. One day, I received a phone call from Sarah, an old high school classmate I hadn't spoken to in ages. "Hey, Lindsay," she said tentatively. "I just wanted to check in. I heard some things about Zach and wanted to make sure you're okay." "Wait, what things?" I inquired, perplexed. Sarah hesitated. "Well, Melanie mentioned that Zach might be, controlling," she said. "She said you've been spending all your time with him and barely talking to your family anymore. I just wanted to make sure everything's all right." I was livid. "Sarah, that's completely untrue. Zach is nothing like that. Melanie just..." I paused, realizing there was no point in explaining. Melanie had already inflicted the damage. When I confronted her about it, she played the victim. "I was just concerned about you," she claimed, wide-eyed and innocent. "I didn't intend for it to be blown out of proportion. You know how people love to gossip." "You're the one who initiated the gossip," I exclaimed. "Why can't you just be happy for me, for once?" Melanie didn't care. She never does. All she cared about was diminishing me and keeping me in the shadow where she believed I belonged. Throughout it all, Zach was my anchor. "Lindsay," he said one evening as we sat on his couch, "you don't owe anyone an justification for our relationship, not to your parents, not to Melanie, not to anyone. The individuals who genuinely care about you will recognize the truth." He perceived the extent of my distress and did everything within his power to offer support. I wanted to believe him, but it was challenging. Melanie's fabrications made me feel progressively isolated. Even some of my closest friends grew distant, seemingly uncertain of what to believe. It felt as though I was engaged in a losing battle, while Melanie was triumphing. But Zach was accurate in one regard. Those who truly cared about me remained steadfast. My best friend, Emily, was among them. Upon learning of Melanie's actions, she promptly contacted me. "Lindsay, this is preposterous," she declared. Anyone who knows you is aware that you're not that type of person. Melanie is simply envious. She can't tolerate your happiness." Hearing those words held more significance than I could express. For the first time in weeks, I felt a lessening of my isolation. Zach, for his part, refused to be influenced by the rumors. If anything, they served to strengthen our bond. He saw through Melanie's manipulative tactics and refused to allow her to jeopardize our relationship. "She can say whatever she pleases," he assured me. "Ultimately, the only thing that matters is us." He was right. Melanie could disseminate as many falsehoods as she desired, but she couldn't negate what Zach and I had built together. For the first time in my life, I wasn't merely Lindsay, the other sister. I was Lindsay, the woman who had discovered love and contentment despite everything Melanie had hurled at her. I used to think that matters couldn't deteriorate further following Melanie's initial insinuations about Zach. I was mistaken. Melanie wasn't content with merely damaging my family's perception of me. She extended her campaign to social media, dragging my reputation through the mud for all to observe. It commenced subtly, as many of Melanie's machinations did. She posted a photograph of herself and her husband, Jason, in front of their expansive suburban residence. The caption read, "It's remarkable what you can accomplish through diligence and commitment. Some of us don't require shortcuts." I knew it was directed at me. The timing was impeccable. Zach and I had recently shared photographs from a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, which Melanie undoubtedly would have seen. I attempted to disregard her posts, but they became increasingly pointed. A few days later, another photograph appeared, showcasing her holding an expensive handbag with the message, "Acquired this with my own earnings." Because some of us don't depend on others to finance our lifestyles. The most egregious one, however, was a photograph of her standing in her garage, a smug expression on her face, holding a coffee mug that read, "Girl Boss." The caption, "It's astonishing how some individuals will do anything for a life of leisure." Her friends and acquaintances chimed in, some even tagging me directly in their responses. I was distressed, but uncertain of how to respond. A part of me yearned to confront her publicly, to defend myself, but Zach cautioned me against it. "She's baiting you," he remarked. "If you react, you're giving her precisely what she desires." He was correct, of course, but that didn't alleviate the difficulty. Every time I accessed social media, there it was. Her self-satisfied expression, passive-aggressive captions, and an army of accomplices. It felt as though she were waging a war against me, and I lacked the means to defend myself. A few weeks later, tensions escalated during a family dinner. My parents had invited everyone over for what they termed a relaxing evening. I should have known better. Nothing involving being in the same room as Melanie could conceivably be relaxing. Melanie was on edge from the moment Zach and I arrived. She greeted us with a feigned smile and an overly enthusiastic, "Oh, hi, you two." But her tone was laced with sarcasm. She barely acknowledged Zach, instead focusing her entire attention on Jason, making a grand display of inquiring about his career, their upcoming vacation, and his plans to remodel their already opulent kitchen. Dinner commenced uneventfully enough. My mother had prepared one of her signature dishes, roast chicken with all the accompaniments, and the conversation was primarily superficial. However, Melanie, ever the attention seeker, decided it was time to stir the pot. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wineglass like a soap opera villainess, and declared, "It's amusing. I was conversing with a friend the other day, and she mentioned how some individuals are living the dream of all gold diggers." The table fell silent. My father coughed uncomfortably. My mother cast Melanie a warning glance, but she ignored it. "I mean," she continued, her gaze fixated on mine. "Imagine encountering someone who's prepared to finance everything. Your vacations, your lifestyle, even your career. It must be quite pleasant, right? Zach stiffened beside me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I refused to let her see me falter. "Are you attempting to insinuate something, Melanie?" I inquired, maintaining my voice as calm as possible. "Oh, no, certainly not," she responded, feigning innocence. "I'm merely making an observation. Some individuals possess all the luck." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Zach interjected, his voice low but firm. "Lindsay works diligently, and she doesn't need to depend on anyone for support." Melanie scoffed. "Oh, I'm certain she does. I mean, graphic design is such a stable and lucrative career path. I'm sure you don't contribute at all, right?" "Enough!" My mother's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Melanie, cease this. This is inappropriate." But Melanie wasn't finished. She slammed her wine glass down with excessive force, the sound echoing throughout the room. "I'm simply being truthful, Mom. Isn't that what we're supposed to do as a family? Be truthful with one another?" I couldn't tolerate it any longer. I stood up so abruptly that my chair nearly toppled over. "Honesty? You wouldn't recognize honesty if it struck you in the face. All you know how to do is demean others, because you can't stand it when the attention isn't focused on you." "Lindsay, don't," Zach murmured calmly, placing his hand on my arm. But I was past the point of restraint. "Do you know what your problem is, Melanie?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. "You can't bear the thought that someone else might actually be content for once. You thrive on making others feel insignificant because that's the only way you can feel superior." Melanie's face flushed crimson, but she remained silent. My father said something about everyone needing to compose themselves, but I refused to listen to his half-hearted attempts at mediation. I grabbed my coat and turned to Zach. "Let's go." We left without uttering another word. The tension in the room so palpable, I felt as though I were suffocating. As soon as we reached the car, I burst into tears. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed. "I can't continue pretending everything is all right when she's actively destroying my life." Zach embraced me, his words soothing. "You don't have to. You don't owe her or anyone else in your family anything. You've worked diligently for what you have, and you don't need to justify it to anyone, least of all Melanie." He was right, of course, but as much as I desired to excise Melanie from my life completely, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. She was more than just my sister. She was my parents' darling, the golden child. Severing ties with her would also mean severing ties with them, which I wasn't certain I was prepared to do. The following few days were a whirlwind of emotions: rage, despair, and frustration. I blocked Melanie on all social media platforms, unwilling to endure any more of her passive-aggressive posts. But the damage had already been inflicted. Friends and acquaintances who had seen her posts were promptly inundating me with questions, their tone laced with thinly veiled disapproval. "You're not actually dating him for his financial resources, are you?" One of them inquired directly. "No," I snapped. "I'm not." But the rumors persisted, and Melanie's shadow loomed larger than ever. No matter how hard I attempted to escape, it felt as though she was always one step ahead, poised to drag me down. After that dreadful family dinner, I knew I couldn't continue subjecting myself to Melanie's manipulations. Every interaction with her felt like a landmine about to detonate, and I was finished falling into her traps. Zach and I discussed it, and we both concurred. I needed to take a step back, for my own well-being. I needed to establish some boundaries, even if it meant foregoing family gatherings. The first test arrived a few weeks later, when my parents announced they would be hosting a cookout. "It'll be enjoyable," my mother declared over the phone, her tone overly cheerful. "Jason and Melanie are attending, And you can bring Zach. We haven't seen you two in ages." I hesitated. "I don't believe that's a wise idea, Mom." She emitted an impatient sigh that made me feel like a troublesome child. "Oh, Lindsay, don't be like this. It's merely a small barbecue. You're not still harboring resentment over Melanie's remarks, are you?" "Are you still upset?" I asked incredulously. "Mom, she essentially accused me of being a gold digger in front of the entire family. And that's not even mentioning all the rubbish she's been posting online." Mom dismissed it with a chuckle. "Oh, honey, you know how Melanie is. She doesn't mean half of what she says. You two simply need to have a conversation." "No, Mom," I replied firmly. "What I need is for her to cease attacking me at every opportunity. Until that occurs, I won't be attending any event where she's present." There was a prolonged silence. Finally, she remarked, "Well, I believe you're overreacting, but if that's how you feel." It wasn't the response I had hoped for, but she didn't press the issue further. Zach and I spent the weekend hiking instead, relishing the solitude and tranquility of the trails, far removed from Melanie's toxic influence. But my absence was not overlooked. A few days later, my father called, his tone amiable, but with that familiar hint of disappointment I'd heard so many times before. "Lindsay, your mother informed me you didn't attend the barbecue because of Melanie. Is that accurate?" "Yes, Dad," I said, bracing myself for the reprimand I knew was forthcoming. "Lindsay," he replied, "she's your sister. Families quarrel sometimes, but that doesn't mean you simply withdraw. Your mom and I raised you both better than that." I felt a knot tighten in my throat. "Dad, this isn't merely a quarrel. This is years of Melanie demeaning me, and I'm not going to tolerate it any longer. I have to protect myself." He sighed. "I understand that you're upset, but don't allow this to fracture the family. You two need to discover a way to resolve things." Fracture the family? The phrase struck me like a blow to the stomach. It was the same guilt trip tactic my parents had employed throughout my life to keep me in line, and I was weary of it. "I'm not the one fracturing the family, Dad," I murmured, my voice quivering. "If you desire to assign blame, blame Melanie." However, he wouldn't. He never would. Over the next 2 months, I adhered to my decision. I declined any invitations from my parents to events attended by Melanie. "Inform us when you're hosting something without Melanie," I'd suggest. They never did. Every time I declined, they'd say I was being overly critical, that Melanie was making an effort, and that I was allowing a trivial misunderstanding to ruin everything. What they failed to realize, or refused to acknowledge, was that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a recurring pattern of behavior that had persisted throughout my life, and I was no longer willing to subject myself to it simply to maintain a facade of peace. The distance from my family was challenging, but it also afforded me the opportunity to concentrate on myself. I immersed myself in my work, taking on new clients and expanding my portfolio. Zach was my unwavering support, always present to offer encouragement and remind me of my value when I experienced self-doubt. Slowly but surely, I began to feel as though I was reclaiming my identity. Lindsay, the artist, the partner, the woman who didn't require her family's validation to feel whole. Melanie, on the other hand, was not content with the altered dynamic. One afternoon, my closest friend, Emily, contacted me. "Hey, have you seen Melanie's most recent post?" she inquired, her tone tinged with apprehension. "No," I replied, my stomach dropping. What did she do this time? Emily hesitated. "She posted this photograph from your parents' anniversary dinner, and the caption stated, 'Some of us actually prioritize our family. Family first.'" I groaned. Unbelievable. She can't stand that I'm not participating in her games, so now she's attempting to portray me as the villain. Emily sighed. I know it's difficult, but don't allow her to affect you. You're doing the right thing by establishing boundaries. I wanted to believe her, but guilt gnawed at me. Every time I saw a picture of my family without me, every time I heard my mother's disappointed tone or my father's exasperated sighs, I felt as though I had failed them. It didn't matter that I was protecting myself. A part of me still craved their acceptance and approval. The breaking point arrived a few weeks later when my parents invited Zach and me to dinner. It'll just be the four of us, Mom assured me. No, Melanie, no drama. I reluctantly agreed. I wanted to believe they were finally heeding my words and comprehending my perspective. However, when we arrived, there was a fifth place setting at the table. My heart sank. Please tell me that's not for who I think it is, I pleaded. Before my mother could respond, the doorbell rang. Melanie entered moments later, a smile playing on her lips. Oh, Lindsay, I didn't realize you'd be here, she remarked, her tone dripping with feigned surprise. I turned to my parents. Are you serious? You deceived me. Lindsay, please, Mom implored. We simply thought if you two spent some time together, you could reconcile. I shook my head, tears of fury and betrayal welling up in my eyes. You don't understand, do you? I'm not the problem here. She is. Melanie gasped, clutching her chest in mock offense. Me? What did I do? I couldn't contain myself any longer. You know exactly what you did, Melanie. You've spent our entire lives belittling me, and I'm finished pretending it's acceptable. I'm done being your emotional punching bag. She smirked. Oh, please, you're so sensitive, Lindsay. Perhaps if you ceased playing the victim all the time, people would actually take you seriously. That was the final straw. I grasped Zach's hand and turned to face my parents. If you can't respect my boundaries, then I can't be a part of this family anymore. My mother began to cry. My father appeared as though he wanted to say something, but was at a loss for words. Melanie simply stood there, looking as self-satisfied as ever. As we walked out, Zach squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, he reassured me. I wanted to believe him, but all I could feel was a profound sense of loss. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, life was tranquil. Zach and I had established a rhythm together, a kind of refuge from the constant drama my family generated. I was still estranged from my parents and Melanie, but I felt no regret. I'd spent far too much of my life contorting myself to please them. I was now prioritizing my own happiness. When Zach proposed, their happiness increased exponentially. We were on vacation, residing in a luxurious villa on a secluded island. It was the type of idyllic setting I could only dream of: pristine beaches, lush vegetation, and a villa that looked as though it belonged in a travel brochure. Zach had orchestrated the entire trip as a surprise for our 2-year anniversary. He instructed me to pack my bags, but didn't disclose our destination, only that it would be extraordinary. The proposal occurred on the second evening, following a romantic dinner on the balcony overlooking the ocean. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the sound of waves lapping against the shore provided the perfect ambiance, I was admiring the scenery when Zach suddenly knelt down, holding a small velvet box in his hand. Lindsay, he began, his voice unwavering but filled with emotion. The past 2 years with you have been the most joyful of my life. You've shown me what it truly means to love and be loved. I desire to spend the remainder of my life with you. Will you marry me? I was so overcome with emotion that I could barely speak. As I nodded, tears streamed down my cheeks, and my heart felt as though it would burst with elation. Yes, I finally managed to utter. Yes, of course I'll marry you. The ring was exquisite. A classic yet elegant design featuring a single diamond that sparkled like the stars above. It wasn't ostentatious or excessive, and I appreciated that Zach had selected something so ideally suited to me. We spent the remainder of the evening celebrating, sipping champagne under the stars, and envisioning our future together. For once, I felt as though my life was my own, defined not by my family's expectations or Melanie's shadow, but by the love and joy I'd cultivated with Zach. When we returned from our trip, we commenced planning the wedding. Neither of us desired anything grand or pretentious. We both prioritized intimacy over spectacle. We decided upon a small ceremony with only 25 guests, close friends and family members who had been supportive of our relationship from the start. Melanie, obviously, was not on the guest list. My parents' invitation necessitated a more difficult decision. I wrestled with it for weeks, torn between wanting them present and fearing the potential drama they might instigate. Ultimately, I decided to invite them, but I made it unequivocally clear that if they brought Melanie as a guest, they would be immediately uninvited. "This is my day," I informed them frankly. "I'm not going to allow her to ruin it." The venue was perfect, a charming winery nestled in the countryside with rolling hills and picturesque views. The wedding would be held in an outdoor garden, followed by dinner and dancing beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. Zach and I collaborated closely with Amanda, a wedding planner who assisted us in bringing our vision to fruition. She was invaluable, keeping everything on schedule and ensuring no detail was overlooked. Of course, Melanie learned about the wedding. I'm still uncertain how. My parents claimed they hadn't informed her, but I wouldn't put it past them to have inadvertently revealed it. Once she knew, the sabotage commenced. It all began with rumors. Melanie contacted extended family members who hadn't been invited, explaining that I had deliberately excluded them because I believed I was too good for the family. She informed one cousin that the wedding was being held at a fancy, expensive vineyard, and that I was squandering Zach's money like it was going out of style. "She's always been jealous of me," Melanie purportedly stated. "This entire wedding is just her way of attempting to one-up me." I learned about the rumors from my Aunt Karen, who contacted me one evening, sounding visibly perturbed. "Is it true, Lindsay, that you're not inviting anyone from your family except your parents?" she inquired. "Aunt Karen, that's not true," I exclaimed, my anger simmering. "We're having a small wedding, that's all. It's not about excluding anyone. It's about maintaining intimacy." "Well, Melanie's been saying some things," she admitted. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her for the heads up and hung up, my hands trembling with indignation. Zach found me pacing the living room, muttering under my breath. "She's unbelievable," I complained. "She's spreading lies about me to the entire family just because I didn't invite her to my wedding." Zach enveloped me in his arms, his calming presence grounding me. "Let her say whatever she wishes," he murmured. "The individuals who matter understand the truth. Don't allow her to steal your joy." He was right, of course, but it didn't make matters any easier. Melanie's rumors triggered a chain reaction, and I soon found myself receiving calls and messages from distant relatives demanding to know why they hadn't been invited. It was exhausting, but I refused to let it impede my plans. When the wedding day arrived, I was a bundle of nerves, not because of Melanie. Amanda had informed me that the venue had stringent security measures in place and that no unauthorized guests would be admitted, but because I wanted everything to be flawless. As I stood in the bridal suite, gazing at myself in the mirror, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My gown was simple yet exquisite, a flowing A-line with delicate lace embellishments and a soft champagne hue. My closest friend, Emily, stood beside me, smiling as she adjusted my veil. "You look stunning," she said. Zach's going to be speechless when he sees you." The ceremony was everything I had envisioned. As I walked down the aisle, my heart leaped when I saw Zach waiting for me, his eyes brimming with love and pride. We exchanged heartfelt and deeply personal vows, and when we said "I do," there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. The reception was equally wonderful. The food was delectable, the wine flowed freely, and the dance floor was filled with laughter and merriment. My parents behaved impeccably, though I could sense my mother was uncomfortable without Melanie present. Still, for once, the spotlight was on me. Not on family conflict or sibling rivalry, but on the love Zach and I shared. As the night drew to a close, I found myself sitting with Emily and a few other close friends, reminiscing about everything that had led to this moment. "You did it," Emily remarked, raising her glass in a toast. "You stood up for yourself and achieved happiness. That's all that matters." Following the wedding, Zach and I hoped Melanie would finally leave us in peace. But of course, that was too much to expect. Instead, her toxic behavior escalated. She began disseminating even more outlandish accusations, not only about me, but also about Zach. According to Melanie, Zach had a history of dominating his partners, had been sued for fraud in the past, and was using his wealth to manipulate me into isolating myself from my family. Of course, it was all fabricated, but the sheer audacity of it was appalling. The worst aspect was that her lies began to damage Zach's professional reputation. One of his business associates, Mark, contacted him to inquire about the lawsuit. Initially, Zach was bewildered, but when Mark mentioned that he had learned about it through a mutual acquaintance, it became evident that Melanie was the source. This was the final straw for Zach. He wasn't one to escalate situations unnecessarily, but this wasn't simply petty family drama anymore. It was defamation, and it was beginning to impact his livelihood. Zach decided to pursue legal recourse. He contacted his attorney, Andrea, a no-nonsense woman who had handled his business contracts for several years. Andrea acted swiftly when Zach explained the situation. "We'll draft a cease and desist letter immediately," she informed him. "If she doesn't comply, we'll escalate to a defamation lawsuit." The letter was mailed a few days later. I hadn't seen it, but Zach assured me that it was clear and left no room for ambiguity. It detailed all of Melanie's false claims, demanded that she immediately cease making defamatory statements, and warned that failure to comply would result in legal action. Zach's tone when discussing it was calm, but resolute. "This isn't solely about us, Lindsay," he stated. "Individuals like Melanie won't stop unless compelled to. She needs to learn that her actions carry consequences. Melanie did not react favorably, as one might anticipate. The day after she received the letter, she telephoned my mother in tears, accusing Zach of bullying her and attempting to ruin her life. My mother, naturally, contacted me immediately, her voice laced with guilt-inducing concern. "Lindsay, what's transpiring?" Melanie asserts that Zach is threatening her with legal action. Isn't that a bit excessive? "She's lying, Mom," I responded, striving to maintain my composure. "Zach's not threatening her. He's urging her to cease disseminating falsehoods about us. She, not him, is ruining people's lives here. But she's your sister," my mother protested, as though that justified everything. "Can't you two communicate?" "No, Mom," I snapped. "We attempted that, and it clearly proved ineffective. This transcends mere family conflict. She's violating the law. If you fail to comprehend that, perhaps you're part of the problem." Mom didn't say much after that, but I knew she still sided with Melanie. It stung, but by this point, I was accustomed to it. Melanie's life began to unravel as the legal pressure mounted. Her toxic behavior had alienated many of her friends over the years, and this latest incident appeared to be the final straw for several of them. I learned through the grapevine that numerous individuals had severed ties with her, weary of the constant manipulation and drama she injected into their lives. Sarah, one of her closest friends, reached out to me. "I just wanted to express my apologies for ever believing Melanie's lies," Sarah confessed. "She's been uttering malicious things about you and Zach for years. But now I realize it's all rooted in envy. She's toxic, and I can no longer be around her." It was validating to hear, but also disheartening. Melanie had always been surrounded by people who adored her, yet her actions had caused her to forfeit numerous relationships. Now, those bridges were collapsing, one by one. She was also experiencing financial difficulties. Jason, her husband, had recently lost his job, and without it, they were struggling to maintain their extravagant lifestyle. Melanie refused to downsize, insisting they could wait it out. But debts were accumulating. Credit card debt, mortgage payments, and the expenses associated with living the fashionable life were catching up to her. Eventually, everything came crashing down. Jason filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. From what I gathered, he had grown weary of her constant need for attention and her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. Melanie's situation deteriorated even further following her divorce. She lost her house and the majority of her possessions and was forced to move in with my parents. I wish I could feel sympathy for her, but I don't. Melanie had spent her entire life diminishing others to elevate her own status, and now she was reaping the consequences. Even so, it was difficult not to feel some residual resentment when I heard my mother discussing assisting Melanie and helping her get back on her feet. "She's experiencing a difficult period," Mom said one day during one of our infrequent phone calls. "We're simply attempting to be there for her." "Of course you are," I replied, unable to conceal my disdain. "Hasn't she always been your priority?" "That's not fair, Lindsay," Mom exclaimed, defensive as usual. "She is your sister. Don't you care about what happens to her?" "No, Mom," I replied simply. "I care about what transpires with me and Zach, and I'm not going to allow her to drag us down with her." It was a harsh statement, but it was the truth. I'd spent far too much of my life worrying about Melanie, about how to navigate her drama, and about how to convince my parents of the harm she was inflicting. I was now focused on protecting myself and the life I had built with Zach. Melanie seemed to fade from my radar over time. The legal letter had been effective. She ceased spreading falsehoods about us, and we were finally at peace. Zach and I immersed ourselves in our careers and our relationship, cultivating a life founded on love and mutual respect. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but I had come to accept that certain things would never change. Occasionally, I received updates about Melanie from family members. She was still residing with my parents and struggling to rebuild her life. A part of me wondered if she'd learned anything from this experience, but I doubted it. Melanie is the type of person who seldom changes. Ultimately, I realized I didn't need her to provide me with closure. I didn't require an apology or an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. What I needed was to move forward, leave the past behind, and concentrate on the future. And that is precisely what I did. It took years, literally years, for my parents to understand what I had been trying to tell them throughout my life. For as long as I could remember, they had overlooked, justified, and even glorified Melanie's behavior, regardless of how toxic or detrimental it was. However, as the repercussions of her actions became increasingly apparent, they were no longer able to disregard reality. I initially detected the shift during a telephone conversation with my father. Melanie had moved back in with them months prior, and I had maintained my distance. My parents periodically attempted to contact me, but our conversations were strained. This time, however, my father sounded different, weary and worn down in a way I had never heard before. "How are you doing, Lindsay?" he inquired, his tone surprisingly gentle. "I feel as though we haven't truly spoken in quite some time." "I'm fine, Dad," I replied cautiously. "Busy with work, you know." There was a pause before he sighed. I wanted to express my regret. The words caught me off guard. "Regret for what?" "For everything," he stated. "For not listening to you, and for not perceiving what Melanie was doing. Your mother and I have discussed how profoundly we've failed you." I was uncertain how to respond. For years, I had envisioned hearing those words, my parents finally acknowledging the pain they had inflicted by consistently siding with Melanie. But now that the moment had arrived, it felt surreal. "Dad," I asked softly, "what prompted this?" "Melanie," he admitted. "Having her back in the house has been eye-opening, to say the least. The manner in which she speaks to your mother, the way she blames everyone else for her difficulties, it's exhausting. It has made us realize that we've permitted her to get away with far too much for far too long." A part of me yearned to feel vindicated, but predominantly, I felt fatigued. "I appreciate the apology," I responded, "but it doesn't alter what transpired." "I know," he replied swiftly. "I don't expect it to. I simply wanted you to know that we see it now, and we are sorry." A few days later, my mother called. She was never as direct as my father, but her message was consistent. "We didn't do right by you, Lindsay," she conceded, her voice thick with remorse. "We disregarded Melanie's behavior because it was easier than confronting it, and as a result, we harmed you. I'm deeply sorry." Hearing their admissions was a step forward, but it didn't alleviate years of accumulated sorrow. I told them as much. "I need time," I explained. "This isn't something I can simply forgive overnight." They appeared to understand, and for the first time, they didn't attempt to pressure me to move faster than I was prepared to. Not long after, I received a letter. It was from Melanie. Seeing her handwriting on the envelope filled me with trepidation. I hesitated, debating whether or not to open it, but my curiosity ultimately prevailed. The letter was lengthy, several pages of meticulously written text, and as I read it, I couldn't help but experience a mixture of emotions. Melanie apologized for everything: the lies, the manipulation, and the years spent undermining and diminishing me. She stated that envy fueled the majority of her actions, but she didn't elaborate on what she was envious of. She apologized for disseminating rumors about Zach, creating tension at family gatherings, and exploiting years of preferential treatment. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I sincerely apologize. I've done a great deal of reflection, and I realize how toxic I've been, not only to you but to everyone around me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but perhaps, someday, we can start anew." Reading her words, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps hope, or maybe optimism. But overall, I felt cautious. Melanie's past behavior had taught me not to take her statements at face value. A single letter, no matter how heartfelt, was insufficient to repair the damage she had inflicted. I showed Zach the letter that evening, and we discussed it over dinner. "Do you believe she's genuine?" I asked. He considered for a moment. "Perhaps. But even if she is, you don't have to welcome her back into your life." "I know," I replied. "I just don't want to make the incorrect decision. If she is sincere, maybe I should give her an opportunity." Giving her an opportunity doesn't mean leaping back into the relationship as though nothing occurred, Zach advised. "You can take it slowly, establish boundaries, protect yourself." He was right, of course. If I was going to explore the possibility of restoring a relationship with Melanie, it had to be on my terms. For the following 2 weeks, I tucked the letter away in a drawer, revisiting it occasionally, but without responding. I wasn't ready, and I refused to be rushed. Meanwhile, my parents continued to work on repairing our relationship. They called frequently, not to guilt trip or pressure me, but simply to check in. It was a subtle but significant shift, and I appreciated it more than I conveyed. Melanie had recently begun attending therapy, according to my mother. I believe she's genuinely striving to change, she informed me. She's been discussing all the things she intends to do differently, how she desires to make amends. That's good, I remarked cautiously, but I'm still not ready. I understand, Mom murmured, and for once, she appeared to mean it. Months passed, and I began to experience a sense of closure, not because I had forgiven Melanie or repaired our relationship, but because I was finally enjoying life on my own terms. I was thriving in my career. My relationship with Zach was stronger than ever, and I had surrounded myself with individuals who genuinely cared about me. My connection with my parents was gradually improving, and while not perfect, it was a step in the right direction. I eventually decided to write Melanie back. My letter was brief and to the point. I expressed my gratitude for her apology and recognized her efforts, but I emphasized that I needed both time and space. I stated that if we were ever to restore our connection, it would need to be under different conditions that honored my personal limits and overall health. I had no expectations regarding her response, and frankly, I was indifferent. For the first occasion in my existence, I wasn't seeking her validation or trying to accommodate her desires. I was prioritizing my own life, which was incredibly freeing. Ultimately, I understood that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing someone's actions or denying the harm inflicted. It means liberating oneself from the burden of that suffering and deciding to progress in a manner that safeguards one's inner peace, which is precisely my intention. Life often surprises you unexpectedly. After years of confronting personal challenges, navigating family issues, and doubting my self-worth, I unexpectedly found myself in a situation where everything was aligning, not because life had miraculously become perfect, but because I had ceased trying to fulfill everyone else's standards. In my professional life, my graphic design work was thriving. Over time, I had built a robust portfolio and earned accolades for my creations. The significant turning point occurred when I participated in an industry contest with a campaign I developed for an eco-conscious fashion label. I had invested my whole being into that endeavor, crafting a visual identity that embodied the brand's spirit while also challenging conventional design norms. When I received a notification informing me that I had won the prestigious International Design Excellence Award, I was initially in disbelief. I suspected an error and reviewed the email multiple times before the reality settled in. Securing that award wasn't merely an acknowledgement of my skills. It served as a reminder that I could attain success on my own conditions. The awards event took place in New York City, and Zach was adamant about attending with me. "This is your special occasion," he declared with pride. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." The gala was a blur. I entered the expansive ballroom experiencing a mix of apprehension and excitement, surrounded by some of the most influential figures in the design world. When my name was announced, and I ascended the stage to accept the award, the applause was deafening. I presented a concise speech, expressing gratitude to those who had supported me, and dedicating the award to the mentors who had encouraged me to follow my aspirations. After the ceremony, several industry leaders approached me, including Isabel Marchand, the creative director of a major advertising firm. She complimented my artwork, describing it as innovative and daring, and expressed her desire to collaborate on a future project. That interaction initiated a professional relationship that would generate countless prospects for me in the subsequent years. Winning the award also motivated me to initiate a project I had been contemplating for years, a mentorship program for aspiring designers. I named it Creative Futures. The objective was simple: to provide resources, mentorship, and opportunities for emerging designers who lacked traditional access to the industry. Establishing the program was challenging. I partnered with regional design schools and industry experts, securing funding through various grants and corporate sponsorships. Zach, my ever-constant supporter, volunteered to assist with the administrative aspects, leveraging his network to connect me with potential sponsors. By the time the program launched, we had assembled a roster of exceptional mentors and a cohort of talented, ambitious students eager to influence the design landscape. The program's inaugural year was remarkably successful. One of our mentees, a young woman named Tasha, secured an internship at a highly regarded design firm, and several others received scholarships to advance their studies. Witnessing their growth and enthusiasm reaffirmed my passion for design. While I was occupied with establishing Creative Futures, Zach was achieving significant milestones in his own professional sphere. His technology firm had evolved from a small, determined startup to a prominent industry player. After years of consistent expansion, Zach chose to broaden its reach internationally, opening offices in London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Berlin. This expansion was a substantial project. Zach dedicated months to traveling among these locations, interacting with local personnel, and managing the setup of each new branch. It was demanding work, but he embraced the challenge. "I've always envisioned taking this company worldwide," he shared with me during a dinner conversation, "and now it's happening. It's quite extraordinary." Despite his demanding schedule, Zach consistently prioritized our relationship. Whether it was reserving an hour for a quiet dinner at home or arranging a surprise weekend excursion, he never allowed work to interfere with our time together. His capacity to balance professional ambition with personal connection was one of the numerous qualities I admired in him. As our careers advanced, we began to contemplate the future direction of our lives. We both appreciated the energy of urban living, but we also yearned for a sanctuary where we could relax and rejuvenate, away from the constant activity. This led us to acquire the lakefront property. Initially, Zach proposed the concept. He had been browsing real estate listings one evening when he discovered the property, a sizable residence situated on the shores of Lake Tahoe. The house itself was magnificent, featuring expansive windows offering stunning lake vistas and a spacious deck perfect for hosting gatherings, and a personal dock suitable for water activities like boating and kayaking. "Take a look at this," Zach suggested, passing his laptop to me. "I think we should arrange a viewing." I browsed the images, my heart racing. "It's gorgeous," I exclaimed. "But do we truly require a property of this scale?" "It's not about necessity," Zach responded with a grin. "It's about establishing a setting where we can de-stress and appreciate life. We've both put in considerable effort, Lindsay. I feel we've earned this." A few weeks afterward, we traveled to Tahoe to inspect the property. The moment we entered, I was certain it was our future home. The residence exuded a dreamlike quality, opulent yet cozy, with every element thoughtfully considered. By the time we left, we had submitted an offer. Possessing the lake house represented the culmination of our combined endeavors. We dedicated our weekends to spending time there, entertaining friends with outdoor cookouts on the terrace, taking leisurely strolls along the shoreline, and unwinding beside the fire pit under the night sky. It evolved into our sanctuary, a location where we could detach from the pressures of our demanding schedules and simply relish each other's presence. Reflecting on our journey, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude, not just for our accomplishments, but also for the path that had guided us to this point, the obstacles we had overcome, the wisdom we had gained, and the unwavering affection that had supported us throughout. I was aware that further chapters of our story remained to be written, but for the present moment, I was content. Life wasn't without flaws, but it was uniquely ours, and that was more than sufficient. We appreciate your viewership. If you haven't already, please subscribe and activate the notification bell to receive updates on additional compelling real-life narratives unfolding around you.